I started recording. All right, so tonight, as I said earlier, we're going to look at Chapter 14, which is crime scene awareness as we move on through this. But regardless of where you're going to end up working, I don't care if you're going to work on an IRP, individual response personnel, you end up going to work for the DOD, you end up going to work in your little mom and pop ambulance service, or a large metropolitan service, you're going to be somewhere along the way, if not daily, affected by some type of violence. I know Brandon and I know Sam Grimm worked in the city here in Lancaster, so I'll speak to that, having to deal with this new concept of every time you show up for the city, everybody standing there with their camera recording everything. I think Sam Grimm, you gave me a great. I wish I would have had a recorder going that day when you gave me your interpretation of everybody filming you and screaming at you. So that's something to be aware of as well. We'll also talk about some other types of form of abuse and or type of violence that occurs. This can even be extrapolated all the way down to station violence with bullying or problems that you may have at work or something like that. Number of weapons, whatever, you name it, from a baseball bat all the way down to a garbage can, as all the way down to somebody biting their tongue and taking their blood-filled saliva and spitting on you. We've seen a dramatic increase in violence among the youth population. There's many sociologists and psychologists that will attribute this to lack of parents at home, increase of violence on TV and video games and everything else like that. We don't know why, but it does roll over to what we do. Of those youth, we're seeing 10 to 24-year-olds, with homicide being the leading cause of death for African Americans, second leading cause of death for Hispanics. And I believe we've discussed this in class. When you look at the statistics, a lot of that comes down to because those 10 to 24-year-olds of the African American as well as the Hispanic population is because they're males in and amongst that age group that have those children are either dead or incarcerated, and it is the grandparents that end up raising them. 1 in 6 victims of violent crimes do require medical attention. And again, that's usually by us with that. We've already talked, again, the bullying. That's something that we're seeing now in the youth market, that 10 to 24-year-old, especially with online bullying, which can lead to retaliatory violence. In my day, retaliatory violence in school was you going outside during recess and getting into a fight in PE. And the coach, who was also the football coach, came over, picked you up, smacked your heads together and said, "What are you doing?" Nowadays, that's rolling over into everybody getting, again, weapons from baseball bats up to, high velocity weapons as we move all that stuff. But again, regardless of what we're going to do or what we're going to do, every day you get in that truck, you're going to potentially be exposed to some type of crime, whether it be violent, blue collar, somebody broke into your truck, stole your iPad, stole your radio, stole your drugs or something like that in that. Regardless, we want to remain alert for any type of danger. Doing your windshield assessment, your 360, listening, knowing your service area. Hey, we're going into a bad area of town. Hey, Joe got beat up here last week. Stuff like that. Being able to read your patients, being able to read the environment around you, listening to that sixth sense of yours. And usually that person down below is very correct majority of the time. Know what your SOPs are, and remember, nowadays we're getting this new aspect of what scene safety and being able to interact within environments where we shouldn't be. I'm still a very large proponent of, if it's not safe, you don't proceed in. I know a lot of my contemporaries are now, we can go into the warm zone in certain areas. But the fact remains, as medical personnel, unless you have military training, unless you have specific tactical training or anything else like that, I firmly believe we are not prepared to do that if you, as an entry-level competent paramedic coming out. Now, if you had to go through 12 months worth of SWAT training, yeah, that would be a different story. But in the majority of we are not. So you should always question while you're doing certain things. And again, some of these scenarios that we see, that we talk about, and again, in a 1 hour lecture, we're not going to get through everything, but your safety should begin at the time of your dispatch. If your dispatcher tells you, hey, there's some stuff going wrong, don't be Johnny or Janie Rescue and go and run in there. Remember, that individual's already injured. There's nothing that you're going to do if you become injured that really is going to change the outcome of that patient. You have to be able to get there safely. You have to be able to treat the patient safely, and then you have to get them out of there and transported to the nearest appropriate facility as quickly and safely as possible. Maintaining safety for yourself and your partner, and finally your patient. Honestly, patient is third on that list. All right, but again, if we look over here, responding to this scene with this tanker truck or this SUV rolled over is going to require a different skill set of you being able to safely act around that versus going into this house. If you end up going to work for a service like that, or even working close to that house burning, safest place for you to be is obviously going to be sitting in your truck using proper PPE and everything else like that, because here this is mobile. You can move away with that. I mean, honestly, the safest place for you to be in any situation that you can't control, whether it's fire suppression, whether it's being able to secure this vehicle from not injuring yourself as you're climbing through, is going to be in your truck. All right. You never want to follow police into the scene because, again, if it is going to be a violent scene, people are going to go after the ambulance as well. Most people nowadays don't care what kind of uniform you're wearing. It's a uniform. So it's something that's going to become problematic. I've seen it problematic over the years. I used to make fun. My first place of employment as an EMT, I used to have to wear what we called the brownies. We literally looked like brownies. It was brown pants and brown shirts, but we were completely different than the police that wore blue. And I also worked for services where I dressed exactly like the cops. In fact, other than the 2 patches I had on my shoulders, I was in the same uniform that the police wore. Again, typically, depending on your scene, wait for the police to secure the scene, let you know it's okay to come in. If you have to, that's where that load and go situation comes in. Throw them on your stretcher, get them into the back of your truck, and get off that scene as quickly as possible. I put this picture here because, again, I don't know, the areas of where everybody works, and I know, with Brandon and Sam, you guys work in Lancaster City. Tori, I know you're down in York. What can you guys answer to? What is the population of gang issues that you see?
I mean, as far as the gang stuff that I've seen, I've only really seen like teenagers that are trying to be hard for their boys, but I haven't seen much organized crime like Philadelphia.
So my experience is the motorcycle gang that we have that's like split up into all different sectors. And then we have it's more of like racially split as far as like Hispanic population and African American and everything else with that.
Sam B, what do you see further east out your way?
I mean, both of my service areas are very affluent, so we don't see many, I guess, like violent gang-related crime. We do border West Philadelphia in my one local, so we do get a lot of overflow from that. I mean, but again, they're coming into affluent areas, so there's usually not like a clashing there. Um, but if anything, we do get anything, it's usually drug or gang related that's coming over from West Philadelphia, but it's very rare.
Okay. RJ, Steffi, Ramey, what do you guys see, if anything?
Not really much in my area, to be quite honest. Some domestic violence is really it. Nothing really gang related.
Yeah, I would say the same in my area. I'm more dealing with like rednecks and picks instead of the gangs.
Scott, what do you got? Lorenzo, you're on. You run down in with Svems. You're down in Columbia and stuff like that. What do you see, if anything?
Sorry, can you repeat that? There's a whole bunch of people here at my place, and I'm trying to
We're
multitask.
I had just asked a question, and we're going around the room asking about your experience with gang violence or working in and around areas that have a lot of gang activity. What have you seen, or are you aware of anything?
Here in Columbia, it's a mix. You have your, I guess, I would say my age population, like your 20s, that have that kind of gang attitude. I know I've had stabbings. I've had fights or people that were drunk that you just find them passed out. So it just kind of depends in the Columbia area as far as what I've been exposed to.
Suspenders, you're back in. Do you have any thing to regarding gang violence or anything like that?
Yeah, we don't really where I am. We don't really see a lot of it. Like Rami said, it's just domestic, if anything.
All right. Mort, Sean, what do you guys got up further north?
No gangs in Reading, Rick.
Okay. Tori, they just sit around drinking 12-year-old single malt whiskey and some cigars, right? Tori, are you on? All right. So that's my experience being in the city of Pittsburgh. You know, we had the Bloods and the Crips in the mid '90s, and I mean, every weekend we would have a spray shooting or something like that. It would roll over to the suburbs. It was so bad in the city of Pittsburgh one time. The firefighters had changed from their new gear to blood red gear. And the Bloods literally took offense to it, so they started taking pot shots at the fire stations in the early '90s. That was something. When I was out in Denver, I got introduced into MS-13 and some of those gangs, but also everywhere I've worked, I've had. If you're not familiar, and we'll talk a little bit about them later, are bike gangs, especially the Pagans and Hell's Angels. And those are unique, at least most of my experience has been extremely unique with those individuals with that. So again, as you approach the scene, try to work with your local police department. And I know I say that tongue in cheekly because there are some police departments throughout the country that will bend over backwards, where there are other police departments that could give two cents. I went from a service that could care less about us to a service that I was complete. My first call, the cops came into my truck, grabbed every piece of gear that they thought I would need and carried it for me into the house, in out back. And they said, "You need anything?" They actually met us at the hospital one time to give us a lift assist. So, it runs the gamut. But regardless, we have to work hand in hand with that. I mean, even with the police there. And I know here, Brandon and Sam can attest to this. We've had issues with our local police department, especially in the city, not wanting to get involved with certain situations because of the legality now, especially with the body cams and everything else like that. But it tends to be we all have to work as a team. And all in all, if it's not safe, get out of there. Know what your SOPs are and get out of there. As I talked about earlier, Chicago is a hotbed. I've got a couple examples here from New Orleans where stuff like that. This kid sitting here, this is a service down in my neck of the woods, Fayette County. But again, that's just there to talk about the safest place for you to be is going to be in your truck. Staged a couple sites away. It sounds like we've all responded somewhere along the way to some type of bar fight, domestic fight, something that's going on, somebody that's going to be recording something somewhere. Regardless, we have to be polite and efficient. And remember, it's not personal. It's a job for us. So we're showing up on somebody's worst day for whatever. Please remember, our main purpose for us to do a scene size up is to look for hazards, whether we're responding to a car accident, whether we're responding to a house fire, whether we're responding to for a medical alarm, and we've got dogs, cats walking around the yard or something like that. Think about even some of those situations. Let's say it's raining, getting out of the truck, or we're in South Central Pennsylvania. What happens if it's an ice storm or something like that? Those are all issues that can go on with us. And again, if you're running at night, I know several of you guys work night turn, running lights and sirens at night may not be the best thing. If you're going into a violent scene, shut those silly things off. You don't need to announce your presence with an authority. Wait for the police to give you the all clear. It's one of those things to be mindful. I know, having the red and white lights typically gives us a free pass when it comes for things. But nowadays it becomes a target for anybody and anything, for whatever reason. If you do have to hold a flashlight, remember to put it down at your side. Because if you do have somebody that's got some type of firearm that's going to try to shoot you, they're going to go for the light. So if you're holding that in your face or something like that, that's where they're going to shoot for us. But if it's far away, it gives you the ability to not get injured if there is a shot or something like that. But again, before you say, "Hey, medics here," listen and observe, and listen to that little guy in your gut, that sixth sense down there. Look for any evidence of a scuffle, any weapons laying around, any alcohol or drugs. One of the best street fights that I remember was some guy right out of The Godfather. Some guy had got beaten up with a top of an old stainless steel garbage can. One guy was using it like a shield. Next thing you know, it became he started bouncing this thing off the guy's head, and we looked at it, flipped it over. Now my hand's on it, but it's a evidence of a assault. This guy's face imprint was on the inside of this garbage can. I don't want to say all the time, but a lot of times you will see that there will be alcohol and or drug usage. You will see much more fights, domestic violences, when it's related to alcohol versus somebody who is intoxicated when it comes to marijuana. Most individuals that I've come in experience with over the years, if they're high secondary to weed, they're hungry, or they don't want to do anything because everything seems, it's too much of a bother. Whereas you get the individuals that are, beer muscles or tequila or something like that. Those are the ones that want to fight. You just want to be careful. A lot of times, learning how to play off the psychology of individuals. I always liked running with a mixed crew, myself and a female, because if I couldn't get them, control them with brute strength or force or a deep voice, a lot of times your female partner can pull out the mom voice. Sam, can you attest to that? Have you ever had to pull out the mom voice on scene? Bueller?
Yeah, Rick, I pull out the mom voice pretty often.
All right, Sean, thank you. I appreciate that.
She texted me and said that she said yes.
Okay.
busy at the moment.
Okay. All right. No problem. All right. So, but place you, and I put this in there, place you and your partner's safety first, because your partner is to there to watch you, and vice versa. The patient's already been injured or something like that, but watch out for that. Watch out for that. Here we have a couple different houses, and yes, two of these are from the York County website. But what do all of these houses have in common? Thinking about accessing or egressing of them, what do you see when you look at them? What are some of the issues that you might experience rolling up on scene of these houses? Anybody can start answering.
Well, the creepy apartment building in the center of all of it, you're going to be stuck in a small area because of the fences that are in every single yard.
Okay, good. And you have to walk up a long, almost gauntlet style area. If this was a violent encounter, your truck's going to be how far away from you, that safe area that you're at. Thinking about that, how much equipment are you carrying with you to get there? If somebody wanted to harm you, do you think that's an easy place to get a hold of you?
Absolutely.
Sure. What about the one off to the left of that, the dark house?
I would just like to say that I really like that house and would live in that house.
Okay.
So I don't know much about what I would say about it.
Okay. Well, think about it. If you're walking up on that scene, look where the porch is on that dark house. What do you have to go in front of to be able to get to that porch? Do you have to walk through in front of windows? If somebody's there trying to entrap or cause issues, every one of these houses has hiding places for individuals to harm you. I mean, from the Brookstone up here, there's windows where if somebody wants to harm you, if there's violence going on. Same thing here. Same thing here. And this one was straight from the York County webpage. One of the meth houses they've worked. What about going off to the side here? Do you think if somebody's having a bad day and they thought it'd be called to SWAT something, that you're rolling in there at like 9, 10 o'clock at night? RJ, you're live. I can hear everything. There you go. Thank you. So it's one of those things that as you roll up to the scene, even though you're like, oh, I've been to this house before, no big deal. Please realize that, you got to have eyes in the back, the front, the sides of your head to realize. And this house down on the bottom here, I don't know. I think that was from the York County page as well. But regardless of what type of house you're going to, please realize that some type of violence can and may occur just by you walking in. So please keep that in the back of your mind when you respond to these scenes. And then there's always two scenarios that can occur. One, you get into a scene, you realize that you missed something's going on. You grab that patient, you get the hell out of there. Okay. The other one is you leave without the patient. And your action is going to depend on what you perceive as your level of danger. There are a lot of people, and I know we talked about it Monday night with abandonment, document it. If there was something going on that you were unaware of, or somebody entered the room, or something changed where you began to fear for yourself, your partner, you get out of there, regardless. And as we said, the abandonment's always a concern, but again, you are legally protected if there was a documented danger, but it comes down to your documentation and finding everything out. Now that doesn't mean that you just get up, leave, and never speak of it again. You call in for backup, you call for police, and then you go in and then you have to take care of it. But again, you have to document. If you have to defend yourself, you have to use the minimum amount of force. And remember, it's not about getting angry and putting somebody in their place. It's about protecting yourself. Now, I want to give you guys a moment here to read this when it comes to documentation. If you wouldn't mind, go ahead and just take 2 or 3 minutes to read this. Everybody get a chance to read that?
No, I need more time.
Okay.
Okay, I'm good.
Okay. So this is a letter written by Officer Tim Spontak, who is the responding officer on a call that myself and my partner, Timmy Graham, had on January 1st back in 1997, New Year's Day. I don't know how lucky I got, but I would work, 24-hour shifts, and this was just in our rotation. And we were the second crew in to help Patty and Jimmy Young. Now, Patty is this little small firecracker of a medic that she's probably 5'3" at the tallest and about 100 pounds soaking wet. Jimmy is an older gentleman. He was at the time, when I say older, I was in my early 20s, now mid 20s, and Jimmy was probably in his mid 40s at the time. So they were the initial crew showing up to a house on New Year's Day that honestly looked like this one down here, this beautiful 3-bedroom, really rich house. They called in, we got dispatched primarily as backup for a female unresponsive. So we come walking in, and Patty and Jim are literally standing there in the corner, hiding from this little girl who was all hopped up on whatever. She was using every swear word in the book. And I walked in and I, said, "What is going on here?" And this girl looked at me and she proceeded to call me everything in the book. She then lunged at me. And I proceeded to take her down onto the bed. She was in a supine position. I crossed her arms across her chest and put them to her shoulders, which at that point she then began attempting to kick me in the groin area, which then caused me to lock down. Which at this point, my partner, Tim, who is, I don't know, Tim was probably 6'5", 300 pounds. He comes walking in, hears this young lady berating me, Patty, and Tim, and Jim, and proceeds to tap me on the shoulder and whisper in my ear and say, "Hey, you two want to be alone?" So this young lady begins to berate me in a manner of such. She then began to spit on me. And my other partners, which at that point, the police officer walked in, Tim walked in, and he said, "What's going on here?" And she then began to cuss and everything, just as far as my relationship with farm animals, up to how this is how I get off, attacking girl. She was completely out. So mom and dad were there. They had nothing to say. Oh, this isn't my daughter. This isn't how this works. Well, I flip her over. We then proceed to get her handcuffed, which then flips over, and she then bit her tongue and spit in my friend, my EMT partner, Jim Young's face, with this, and proceeded to cuss and bemoan. At that point, the police officer then took a towel that he had come up with, or I forget where it came from, and shoved it in her mouth and told her in many, many ways to shut the F up, or she was going to get maced. That kind of, held her up. We ended up literally hog tying her and throwing her properly, not fully hog tying her, but throwing over somebody's shoulder and carried her down the steps. The parents were not happy about it, and the father was a highfalutin lawyer. So the letter that you're reading here, okay, was a letter that Tim wrote to us, to my boss at the time, basically saving all 4 of our jobs. And it literally, they, 2 days later, the next day, they pulled both PCRs, the mom and dad did, because we had abused their daughter. So having a good working relationship with the police and everything else like that, is very, very helpful. I know this is only 7 or 8, paragraphs, but the reason why it was written was not out of the goodness of Tim's heart. It was written out literally to save the 4 of our jobs, because the young lady was out of control, high, everything else like that, had come from a very ended up coming from a very affluent family who didn't appreciate, even though they called us because she was drunk, and we had to deal with it. So please be mindful. And this comes from a very exclusive neighborhood located in northern Allegheny County. So please be mindful, and good documentation on your end, your partner's ends. If you're on a dual crew, they should go together, and being honest and everything else like that, but it can't save you from a big problem down the road. Some other issues that we go along, some dangerous scenes that we're going to see. Anytime you guys roll out on a highway, it is going to be a problem. Anything over 5 miles an hour is going to become problematic. Violent street incidences, obviously, and there's down in New Orleans. Drug-related crime, please remember that. Clandestine drug labs. And domestic violence. And we'll talk about each one as we go along. And I put this picture here for the U-Haul. Please realize that there are mobile meth labs. If you've taken any of the classes related to human trafficking, especially being so close to 76, being in between Philly and Baltimore, as well as with our closeness to I-80. I-80 is a real big one, where not only do we get a lot of human trafficking, but also clandestine drug labs in the back of U-Hauls, in the back of semi-trailers with that. We already talked about your highway encounters. Every time you're out on the scene, did that patient wreck secondary to being intoxicated? Are they having a medical issue? Is it a medical issue that caused the trauma? Is it trauma causing a medical? Your good assessment, but also being able to operate around that vehicle safely. The number of times that service areas that I had that, had interstates running through them and having, car chases and stuff like that. You never know when that's going to happen, but also with the prevalence of weapons. And again, the suicide bags and stuff like that. Please be mindful. Always look around, look in the back seat. Make it unpredictable for yourself. When you pull up on the scenes, please realize that you show up on the scenes, you may have a patient that's, lashing out, violent, abusive behavior. They may sometimes an altered mental state for some way, shape, or form. Are they grabbing or hiding items inside the vehicle? Please remember, you're responding to the scene and somebody's throwing alcohol out the windows or what you believe to be Ziploc bags. That needs to go into your documentation. Or is there arguing or fighting amongst the passengers? Is there a lack of activity where there should be activity expected? Any signs of alcohol or drug abuse in that open or unlatched trunks? Listen. I can tell you a couple times I showed up on I-79 and there were some people locked in trunks, whether it was a joke or not. It was problematic. That's why, cops always get on scene and try to separate parties. Put yourself in a position to escape very easily, as well as put yourself away from oncoming traffic, whether you set your truck up as a blocking, 100 yards away. Yes, that means you have to carry your equipment to it. But anytime you get on scene with these, verify your exact location as best you can. Vehicle make and model, state, number of license plates in case something is going on. Document that somewhere. That way, in case there is something, you have that. And again, you put it in your PCR. It's now a legal document. Use a one-person approach. I always recommend staying away from the driver's side because that follows the flow of traffic. If you want to don't think that something happens. There was a medic that passed away in the past 6 months out in my service area, out near Pittsburgh. He was on I-70. And tractor trailer came by and clipped him and killed him instantly. So that's always an issue. Stay on the passenger side. Make sure that you have some type of blocking, whether you're using the C post, B post, in case somebody would want to do something. Because again, most people don't see the backwards ambulance in the back of the, rear view mirror. They see lights. And again, most individuals don't know Pennsylvania vehicle code or the other codes. In Pennsylvania, ambulances are going to have amber and red, amber or white, where most PDs are going to have red and blue. So those are things to remember. Somebody stays close to a radio in case something happens. You could if you do have a emergency switch or something to get you help with that. All right. And always never walk between the ambulance and another vehicle. Always get out, walk behind your vehicle, and you never want to get in between two parts in case somebody wanted to back up into you or your vehicle decided to let loose or something like that. As we talked about, use the passenger side. Most people don't expect that. Use your doors for covers, A, B's, and C's. And make sure you observe the rear seat. If you got a minivan or something like that, look into those rear seats. How many times have you guys shown up for a car accident and there were two car seats with nobody in them? Where'd they go? Look under seats. Do all that stuff that you need to do. And if there is danger, get back to your buggy as quickly and get out of there. All right. Violent street incidences. This is always fun. If you've never had the opportunity to work a large street fair or work something of that nature, even a fireman's fair or something like that, you get a lot of people together, especially if they have booze. In Pittsburgh, we have the Rib Fest, and, we have Kenny Chesney concerts and all that other stuff, large gatherings where there is alcohol. These two pictures here I have are from New Orleans during Mardi Gras, as well on Bourbon Street. It's interesting to note that Mardi Gras, during the week of Mardi Gras up to Fat Tuesday, is under martial law, meaning the police have all of your rights are excused if you get into an altercation with the police. They just pick you up and they throw you into the into the squad car and away you go. But again, you guys that do respond into highly congested areas can attest to this. The mob is a very unique situation. Down in New Orleans, they do still use, during Mardi Gras, they do bring out their mounted police. And, you can watch videos online where people actually get into fights with mounted police officers. They're 5 foot above them. I've seen ones where they've tried to punch the horse and the horse kicks them back. So there anything from a medical issue all the way down to trauma when it comes to that. But again, as we go up and down, the individuals with beer muscles, individuals that do carry concealed weapons, and a lot of times in these situations, hopefully police are already there, but any type of weapon can be utilized. 1 in 5 violent victimizations use some type of weapon. And again, hate crimes, that's not one of the things, but when you start getting into gang activity and stuff like that, there may be the potential there for hate crimes, especially what we saw in Charlottesville and stuff like that, where we had a mass gathering and we had an individual who took a vehicle and ran into them. That ended up being a hate crime, so just be mindful of that. Some dangerous weapons you may not have thought of. Most of the time when individuals, we talk about weaponry, we can, easily see that AK-47, the Glock 9, Initech 9s. Here we have a couple Tommy guns with large barrels, an Uzi, 30 round burst in 3 seconds. But again, those are the big ones. They do occur, but don't forget, we have knives, we have shanks, we have screwdrivers, baseball bats. If you're a fan of The Walking Dead, a baseball bat with barbed wire or nails through it, aluminum or anything like that. Lacrosse sticks, anything. Broken pieces of bottles, especially in the Mardi Gras area. That's why when you go to large gatherings, you'll find that your Coors Light are in cans or plastic bottles that don't shatter with that. So please be mindful. Also, when you start getting into those large crowds, you can be easily disoriented, become separated from your police protection or your partner, as well as there's a lot of shoving and pushing that go on with that. You can have trampling injuries in that, and as well as things can with a flip of a switch become hostile. All right. Again, the mob rules, and it's something to think about. And again, rapid increase in crowd size. And there's a time when the cops will say, I can't control this. Let's get out of here. You have to leave. But, if you can, take your patients with you. But if not, you'll have to come back and get them. And again, rapid assessment. Those are your ABCs, and get out. Get them in the truck and get it as far away as you can. We talked a little bit about gang activity. Depending on where you're at, this one here is MS-13, primarily of Mexican descent, coming up and out of Colombia, up through Mexico City into the western states. If you end up going for a job like from Texas west, you'll see a lot more. They do have a more of a prevalence in the larger eastern cities like Atlanta, Baltimore, and Philly. But again, those are issues, gang signs, gang tagging, all that other stuff. And again, as we had talked about earlier, don't forget motorcycle gangs as well. Hells Angels and Pagans are two of the more famous in and around the area. But again, they have, they get into fights, they get into stuff. You may end up having to take care of them. The one things that you do want to remember walking away from this is never cut a motorcycle gang's colors. If they're wearing leathers, cut them up the seam. But if they're wearing their colors and you cut that, they will find you, and it can lead to some problems down the road. So try to be as conscientious, do some homework on it and everything else like that that you can. And again, appearance of gang members, usually within some type of crowd. They will have graffiti, like I said, tagging in and about the area, and tattoos. And you will find out that a lot of tattoos that you'll find do identify individuals as such. And you'll learn that once you get out there if you do have a large gang populace. What we found too in the last 10 years, a lot of times as employers, individuals will come back from the military with tattoos, not knowing what they actually were because they were in the military and it was their unit designation. A lot of those have had fallout when it comes to local gangs because of similarities. So just be mindful of that as well. Hand signs, all that other stuff. Take a gang course. If you've never done it, get with your local police department and talk about, hey, who are the gangs around here? What are some of the signs that they're using? What are some of the taggings that are going on? Know where individuals operate. Walk into these areas very, very lightly. Please realize, wearing the same uniforms of your local police department can cause problems. Especially if you don't have, if you have a very forceful police department, it can cause problems. Drug-related crimes. Everybody that's been in EMS for at least the past 2 years knows all about drug-related crimes, whether it's related to K2, heroin, bath salts, anything else like that. Most times violent crimes, assault type crimes are due to individuals trying to get money to buy more drugs. So those are something to become familiar with. Become familiar with drug paraphernalia, small bags, stuff like that, sandwich bags with the corners torn off, syringe needles, glass tubes, pipes, homemade devices to smoke whatever they're smoking, odors of chemicals and or residues. If you're old enough to remember what blunts are and getting Swisher Sweets, rolling up to the Wawa and seeing a couple locals coming out with 3 or 4 packs of Swisher Sweets, and then they end up going into, a vehicle, and 20 minutes later with smokes, just like Cheech and Chong up in smoke, they got high. Couple of these things that will be, that you end up seeing, the needle and the damage done. There's your cooking spoon, some roach clips to hold your weed. And again, here we see some bongs moving around. And again, my experience, and if you look at the pharmacology of weed, most individuals that are just high on weed are not going to give you too much of a problem. It's when we start getting into the speed, into the meth, into the PCP, LSD, and stuff like that, where individuals tend to become violent with that. Drug labs, and again, clandestine, know your service area. You guys, stuff travels very, very quickly on the street. People that are doing meth, crank, speed, crystal, whatever they want to call it, these individuals, what they look like. They've got summer teeth, some are here and some are there. They have very thin hair. They may have no eyebrows. They may have burned upper lip secondary to huffing or puffing on their pipes or anything else like that. I will tell you, my first drug-related injury as a early medic came in the city of Braddock with a 12-year-old that got stabbed in the neck with his own crack pipe. 12 years old. How was I supposed to respond to that? These clan labs, the clandestine labs, there are classes out there, hazmat courses, stuff like that. But you're walking in, you get an odor of things smelling that just don't smell right, methane or heavy acetone. If you see a lot of propane tanks that are not in a regular location, you have propane tanks next to a propane grill. Okay. You have 100-gallon or 500-gallon in the back heating the house. Okay. But if you get 30 of these laying out front, I think, RJ, you had said you're dealing with rednecks, down in your area. If their primary car is up on 3 blocks, and they've got like 30 of these laying around, they may not be in the scrapping area. So just be mindful of that. Most clandestine labs that you're going to come across typically have to be private. I do know of a couple chemical processes now that take place in large trucks on I-80 where these individuals are able to cook in moving vehicles. And then once they're done cooking, they take their product, dump out all their supplies, they're disposable, and they move on. But walking into, that project house or something like that, you end up seeing one of these or stuff like this in the house, your spidey sense should be going off. And again, here you can see a couple different local places. This one came off a meth site that I was looking at. This one here I thought was a little funny. This was right out of Breaking Bad. But Method Man, the rapper, drove around on a tour with his meth lab where he had a music lab in it. But that was funny. But again, they can be anywhere and anything. And you just walking in your blues is not going to protect you enough, especially with no respiratory gear. But again, if you end up showing up, do me a favor, grab your patient, get out. And also, please remember, even if you're taking care of that patient that was exposed to all of that stuff that they were venting, please realize they're going to be off-gassing. In reality, that is a hazmat incident, and that patient should be deconned before you take them to the hospital with that, because they're going to be off-gassing some really bad crap. But again, the PD in there, that's going to end up taking, either the DEA, your local drug force agency, or fire department to come in and declare hazmat and all that other stuff coming in that area. Because again, they all end up having to come in, and you can see this guy's all teed up. But they'll be testing stuff and everything else like that. And this honestly turns into a overnight standby for EMS after the initial call, because you end up having to stand by and wait for them to get everything done. And here's just a picture of some final product of some powdered meth. You can get it clear. You can get it in the form of ice and everything else like that. But this just, I mean, it literally looks like Ajax. Some other things that RJ, Ramey, and Scott had discussed regarding domestic violence. We're seeing an increase with domestic violence with the whole COVID quarantine. You'll see more and more around the holidays, as well as large sports events, whether it's baseball or the football, with Super Bowl and stuff like that. But the one thing to remember about domestic violence is while women are on the high end of receiving domestic violence, as you can see, women are up to, of any type, close to 30% of reported types of abuse. Please realize that there is a subsection, about 12.5%, of men that do suffer domestic abuse as well. Now, please remember, when we say domestic abuse, it's something that occurs in the home. It doesn't have to be partner to partner or spouse to spouse. That's also putting in there when we start looking at elderly abuse as well. Please realize that during these cases, the abuser may turn on you or other members, as well as based on, and I'm sure you guys that have ever responded to domestic violence, if the abuser is taken into custody, a lot of times, I don't know what the stats are, but the individual who was being abused may have not reached that pinnacle yet of saying, oh, you're an abuser. They may end up coming after you. If you ever want to see that occur, watch Cops. That may occur. Okay. And again, please remember, if a scene becomes unsafe, get out of there. Come back with assistance. Numbers help. All right. TAC teams, coming out of paramedic school and coming out of EMT school, none of us are prepared to work and or function as a tactical team. There are years and years and years of experience that goes into being a tactical medic. Being first on scene, you're not a tactical medic. You may want to wait until your SWAT team shows up or PD go in. And I know there's changing thoughts on that, but again, it's very dependent on what your local protocols and local needs are for that. But again, initially here we see retreat. If you end up coming into a tactical situation with weapons being fired at you, you have to be able to and know the difference between what's known as cover and concealment, which there is different. You can hit cover, but you're not concealed. But you can get concealed and be covered. So there's some issues that go along with that. Distracting your patients. We could take a page out of the police manual when it comes to that. Evading individuals, definitely. Talked about contact and cover. And then, do you and your partner have warning signals and communications when it comes to those things? That way your partner, hey, you have a safe word or something like that that only you and your partner are aware of, or, a look that you give your partner that's able to get you guys squared away. Other thing, you're going to be under a lot of stress with this. I don't know if anybody here has a orange button, a panic button on your radios, but knowing what they do, how they react, and knowing what you do before you activate that magic button, and notifying your dispatcher of what situation you're going to, exactly where you're located. That way the incoming units that's coming to help you, PD or whatever, knows what you're doing. All right. Getting back to your truck is going to be the highest priority. But if you have somebody shooting at your ambulance, you getting into the front seat and with your glass, does that provide you cover or concealment? No. But if you have to get out, you got to be able to make sure that there's some type of obstacle that you can get behind. If something is blocking your truck, you're kind of stuck there. So that's why when you come into a scene, you should not only be able to get in there very easily, but also get out very easily. Never allow yourself either in a structure or anywhere else to be able to be blocked in. All right. Always protect yourself. Seek cover, and always allow enough distance between you and your patients or a crowd if they attempt to move in on you. Those are something to think about as you go along. Know what your SOPs are, and you got to document everything. All right, document everything. Please realize that retreating does not mean the end of the call. Until you can get back up in there and people to take care of that, you're still going to have to go in there and take care of the patients for the original call. Or if something did escalate, you may end up having to take care of more people, or initiate IMS. And it may have turned in from a one call to something where now you have 7 or 8 patients because somebody got angry and started swinging the baseball bat. You never know. But again, it all comes down to reducing your overall liability, and with that comes with good documentation. All right. Concealment versus cover. Remember, concealment just hides your body. Where in these situations, if people are throwing things at you, shooting things, you actually need to get cover. Where cover, you actually hide your body behind solid and impenetrable object as best as you can. Now, again, I'm going to reiterate, the safest place for you if you ever come into these scenes is in your truck down and away from the block. Now, this is also assuming that you don't have the requisite training, equipment, etc., to assist in these types of situations. Unfortunately, my belief, in my opinion, when it comes to modern day EMS, and individuals have a false sense of security when it comes into wearing ballistic vests, which we'll talk about here in a few minutes. I get to wear this $400 vest. This is going to protect me from everything. And not really. And I have a video for you guys to watch after class that will attest to that. But again, here you can see these individuals are being concealed behind this bush. Bobby Joe comes out of there, Billy Joe Bob or Bobby Joe, whatever, with a little 22 plinker and just starts firing into here. That they've concealed themselves, but they're not covered. Whereas if this is the same situation, they're now covered and concealed in and around that area. But again, choose carefully what you're going to do. You're only going to have one chance to pick your protection in and amongst that. So please be mindful of what you're going to do. Once you've made your choice of cover, conceal as much as your body as you can. The old adage is, if they can see you, or rather, if you could see them, they could see you. All right. If you got somebody chasing you or something going on, throw your equipment to try to trip them, just like every bad 80s movie you've ever watched. People run, people trip, people fall, any movie, people will start throwing things so that way the people that are chasing them will try to become distracted. You hit them or they end up falling over. Now, I will speak for myself. Each and every one of you can do an assessment of your own physical health. But I will tell you, release of my sympathetic nervous system will probably get me 30 yards away. That's about it. After that, I'm dead. Michael Myers is getting me. Sam, do you have a question?
Oh, I'm sorry. No, I didn't know I unmuted.
Okay. So think about that. If you need to run away from somebody, how far are you getting away? The old joke is, I only have to be faster than my partner. But again, please realize that. Where's this other one? Be aware of your know your service area. As we progress through here over the next, what is this? April, May, June, July, August, approximately the next 4 to 5 months, once we sit for the National Registry, you're going to be a paramedic, and you're going to be responsible for your partner and your patient. So there's a lot of things that are you're going to have to learn how to transition on. Okay. Talking with your partners, figuring like that. Contact and cover. I just got a couple different pictures here on when we look at setting ourselves up related to protecting ourselves. Here you can see these two individuals that are at the same level of the patient. Here you can see these three individuals have taken one at the head, one at the feet, one off to the side. And then what you will see most of the time, taking this out of a page of a law enforcement manual, is what you'll see is police officers will take a 90-degree approach. One in front, one off to the side, one in the back, one off to the side. That way, if your patient, or as they call them, the perps, end up being problematic, you always have someone there to distract while doing something. So please be mindful and pay attention next time you're on scene with your PD and how they approach. You can learn a lot just by watching those guys. We've already talked about situational awareness as ad nauseum. Remember, the idea behind the BSI scene safety is a one idea concept. With the idea of situational awareness, you're being aware that your situation can change at any one time. All right. Always keep dispatch in the back of your head. All right. I know we have, what does LCWC, Sam or Brandon, do? Is that they do a well check every 20 minutes? If they don't hear from you, they radio up in 20 minutes.
Yeah, it's supposed to be 20 minutes. Sometimes they miss the mark, but they're doing other stuff.
Yeah, no, I understand. So that's something to realize as well. If you think something's going to happen, get on the radio and let them know, because all radio transmissions are admissible in court as well. So those are things to be advised for. I wanted to put this up here just because of the concept of tacking up your tactical. Now, wearing a vest does have a place in EMS. It really, really does. But most people don't go into purchasing a vest knowing what they are doing properly. Please realize not all vests are created equal. They're usually rated from a level 1, which is the least protective, up to a threat level 4. And you can go even further on that depending on whether or not you're going to buy blast plates, whether it's a soft body armor, a hard body armor, or something like that. But in general, what we tend to look at is level 1 through 4. 1 is a little handgun from a 22 long rifle, high velocity. It will deflect it. It will stop it. All the way up to a 30-06, up to, which is a threat level 4. But please note that level 3s and level 4s, depending on the recommendation of the manufacturer, may or may not stop a knife with that. So if you're looking at something, if you're going to work in a high impact area and you need that, I mean, most body armor does wonderful jobs when it comes to blunt injuries, when it comes to being involved in a car accident with a seatbelt. It will help diffuse a lot of that damage. But it's funny, most individuals don't know the difference between a 1 to a 2 to a 2A, 3A, and all that other stuff. So if you're already wearing it, know what you're able to, what it actually does for you. Also, please realize that there are areas that leave you wide open, and I have a video for that you guys can watch after class. But here you can see from Dr. Bledsoe, this individual wearing soft body armor. This one probably was not supposed to be an exterior. This was supposed to be underneath the uniform, but somebody ended up putting it over top just for ease of taking on and off. Now, again, whether you purchase it or not is going to be completely up to you. There are some services that are offering them. You got to wear them properly. You got to wear them all the time. You just can't pick and choose. It's sort of like suction. Oh, I need the suction. Well, too late now. But please remember, a lot of the body armor doesn't cover the whole body. You can still get seriously injured or killed. Please realize that most prisoners that are incarcerated throughout the country actually train to learn how to stab a corrections officer or police officer around body armor. Whether it's at the waist or underneath the arms or at the jugular, at the clavicle region. Please realize that. After we're done here, I'll email you guys this link. But it is a web video. It's a PD web video. of a San Diego fire medic by the name of Ryan Jones. I met Mr. Jones as well as did Dr. Rehart last year at one of the conferences, but he showed up to the call for a sick individual, and one of the bystanders ended up getting very, very violent with the crew. It ended up being an engine crew. And within 3 seconds, and you'll see it really, really quick, the medic ended up being stabbed 3 times with one coming in underneath his left armpit on the posterior axillary line, which ended up popping his left lung. Now, these guys did not have to wear vests. He was just in a duty uniform, which is for them, station pants, boots, and a t-shirt. But this individual, and you'll see as the individual comes around very, very quickly, in 3 seconds, comes up and underneath this individual's left arm and stabs him 3 times, literally in 3 seconds. And the video you'll watch is actually slowed down to where you can actually see it. But this happens, so please be mindful of it, and I'll send this out to you here in the next after we're done here, so you can watch it in your own. Please note the body armor can prevent many types, but it could still you could still experience severe cavitation, and it must be worn. And here you can see there's various types up here in this picture. This picture down here is of 2 of my buddies. This is Scotty Gehring. He was the medic supervisor on that dispatch I get, I think in first semester, about the chainsaw to the neck. That's him. And then this here is Richie Bernstein. Richie's one of Ross's. They're both TAC medics, but Richie here is dressed up in their full gear. This is just if you're just showing up on without the SWAT team. This is if you're deployed as the SWAT team. But this service is just north of the city of Pittsburgh. And these guys are in training, honestly, every 2 weeks. Every weekend they're out there doing something training. So there's a difference between just showing up on scene with a vest versus showing up on scene as part of a tactical SWAT team. All right. Hot zones versus warm zones versus cold zones. When we start looking at the new aspects now of active shooter or active engagements, active scenes, we're being and again, I try to remain objective on this, but most crews going onto these active shooting calls or stuff like that are lowly unprepared for it. Tourniquets and everything else like that. Yeah, but actually going into the warm zone, I'm not really a big fan of it. I'm trying to work my way into working it in, but it's one of those things where if, trying to go in with the police team or something like that, I still have questions. Changing times require changing thoughts, and I'm working on it. But again, as we've talked about it, all this stuff, you're going to end up needing special equipment with everything we go. When we start talking about TAC situations, we're talking about more trauma patients than we are medical patients. All right. Most of the time, by the time you get into these, hopefully an incident commander is already in scene, and you try to coordinate that. Hopefully a unified where you got PD, fire, and EMS all together in one. These patients are literally, you fix the life threats in the warm zone, tourniquet on, open airway, you grab them, throw a loop around them, whatever you use to get somebody up and out, and you take them out of there, get them into a cold zone for overall care and transport with that. And we've talked about that. Extra training is required. These are just a couple pictures here of what are called controms. Controms are counter narcotics TAC ops. When I did a general, I'd never heard this term before other than in this lecture. I Googled it and I really couldn't find anything. Most of the time when you deal with somebody came up with this really cool, military term. But basically these are the crews that go in on narcs calls where you're going in with that, looking for that meth lab or something like that, where you may have hazardous conditions. Not only is there potential there for some type of violence, whether it be blunt trauma or penetrating trauma, but also issues where it comes to where your air environment is compromised. So this is not something that you should be going in these calls just in your regular gear. Some other things we have to worry about is crowd control. Some of the stuff that you may or hopefully never have to be experienced with is if you end up with a mass casualty scenario, depending on what your services local police department may or may not use, is some type of lacrimation breathing device. When we look at like CS, which is also known as tear gas, CN, mace, pepper spray, which is made out of capsaicin, which is the active ingredient in most peppers off the Scoville scale. There's also the military kind. It's called CR. Not the military, but the European kind, which is called DBO, CR. But these are basically dispersion types devices. When opened and activated, release some type of eye and respiratory irritant with these. So you may end up having to go into the scene. Patients end up needing deconned with that. But remember, these most of these, like mace and tear gas and capsaicin, these are all fat laden devices, meaning the products that cause these problems are laden with some type of lipid molecule. Meaning, if you try to flush somebody's eye out with water, with this stuff, it's only going to spread it. So you end up needing some other type of fat liquid. And honestly, the most easiest type of fat liquid to get is whole milk. If you were to be exposed to something like this, washing it with soap and water isn't going to work. Go to Turkey Hill and have a bottle of whole milk there. That'll help dispense it more. But these also not only can actually cause problems for us, but we'll end up having some type of injury or illness around the area. It usually drives people away. Please remember, in these, potentially for tactical, especially with large group gatherings, there may be the issue with blank firing weapons, rubber bullets or something like that. Helicopter ops, you may end up having to go somewhere. We get drone operations now. If you've never been in place, I know there are some old cops around that will bring in a fire truck and disperse people with their deck gun. And don't forget, during these, you may end up having pyrotechnics that go along with the tear gas, especially if you go into those clandestine labs. They'll dump a couple scatter grenades in there that'll and then release stuff to get people to come out. So just please remember with that, if you've never been exposed to stuff like that, it is it's very, very interesting. And I would highly, highly, highly recommend anybody that ever gets a chance to go and drill with the local PD or the SWAT, just to stand around and watch how they do things. I highly recommend it. And then there's a whole other issue that goes along with firefighting and hazmats stuff. We've already talked about crime scene with Wes and everything. I'm not going to bore you with that. But again, please remember, every scene that we see is a potential crime scene. Our job when we get there is to treat the patients. All right. Law enforcement comes to protect the public and to solve the crime. But the idea behind EMS and PD working together is a valiant one, and we have to be able to do certain things. Please remember, our job is to preserve the evidence. If you guys had attended last year's or we had worked with our local coroner talking about preserving of evidence when it came to dead bodies or calling in the coroner and stuff like that. Please realize that anything we do and or touch in and around the patient can be considered evidence. Please document anything that you touch, walk on, wipe up, cut off. Anything that you do needs to be documented with that. Observe, your spider sense needs to be very well documented here because you want to observe your patient carefully and document all of that stuff. You walk into somebody's house and there were needles and stuff laying around. Don't move them, Please realize that when examining a patient that you may be at risk, your first job is to protect yourself, your partner, and then your patient. And if you think that there's suspicious activity or anything, notify the PD, have them frisk, remove anything. With that, don't forget, if the PD are going to handcuff somebody, they have to go to the hospital with you. We're not permitted to transport. And I know that I say that tongue in cheek because we've all had incidents where, the cop throws us the handcuff Key. Remember, we never transport anybody prone position. They all have to be in a supine position, hopefully with their hands handcuffed in front of them, not behind them, because of the AC issues with that. So don't forget types of evidence that we can see: prints, footprints, tire prints, fingerprints, blood and blood and bloody splatter, body fluids, particulate evidence, and our on-scene observations. These are all things that go into criminal investigations. And if you guys have never been caught up on a criminal investigation, it's not something that I recommend. But it's something that you should experience at least once in your career for doing anything with that. All right. If you touch or move anything, let people know. Hey, that wasn't there. That wasn't, especially when it comes to shootings. The angle of the weapon, post-mortem can tell a lot to the coroners and all that other stuff. All right. DNA, they will swab. They can do CRISPRs now, where they can put stuff together. They can tell with very high accuracy whose DNA was where and when. So please be mindful of that. Samples, as Wes and I had even said, putting stuff in brown paper bags. 30 years, I've never had to do that. But I've always been mindful if I've been shooting or something like that, don't cut directly through a stab wound or a shooting, somebody that got shot. And again, accidents do happen, but don't try to go out of your way and cut through stuff. Work with your local PD to be able to take care of this stuff in a manner that works for everybody. All right. Talked about particulate, your observance, your factual observance, not your opinions. But again, as we talked about the other day, as Wes commented, if you declare a patient dead, leave everything you used on that patient with the patient. Leave the tubes, leave the IVs in place, leave the IV bag, leave the everything out there. Be respectful, but just leave it there. Because all those little pinpricks and, those IV starts and all that other stuff, those end up becoming part of the coroner's report. And it's much easier for them to document it than it is for you down the road. Documentation, again, this is going to be your biggest savior throughout your entire career. Your documentation should include any conditions at scene that you come in. The position of your patient and victim, not only where they were initially, but also where you move them to and or left them. Any obvious injuries that you found them, any statements of persons at scene. Remember, anytime you put anything in a live statement, it has to be quoted. Okay, any statements that were said by the patient or the victim, and if the individual had a dying declaration. Please remember, if anybody gives you any dying declarations and they die, that becomes legal precedent. Okay, that's right there. Somebody confesses to something, that is a legal precedent that is true to the end. Notice if anybody flees the scene. Any presence or location of weapons. Don't be the Lenny Briscoes or whatever crime show you like to watch. Don't take your pen and put it into a barrel of a weapon and move it over. Don't do that. All right. But again, regardless, you should do this on every call, but accurately document everything you see. Avoid your opinions. If somebody says they drank 6 beers, patient states they drank 6 beers with that, because these take 2, 3, 4, 5 years possibly to where they work their way through the legal system, and you run 2,000 hours a year, average 1.5 call every hour, so you're looking at well over 1,000 calls a year. 1,000 to 1,500 calls a year during one tour of 2,080 hours. So please keep in mind, you're not going to be able to remember everything. So in summary, first priority of any scene, whether it's a crime scene, accident scene, anything else like that, is your safety, followed by your patient, followed by your partner's safety, and ultimately your patient safety. If you can't secure those first two, you can't help your patient. You need to become aware of the crime scene awareness and everything else like that. All right. Whenever you survey your scene, okay, please realize if you have a darker house, lack of activity, something like that that's really, really weird, or you end up having that little, that little third party in your head going, hey, this really isn't a good idea, believe them, okay? Don't expose yourself to dangers. There's no reason why you need to be Johnny Rescue, Janie Rescue, or anybody else. Don't get yourself hurt or your partner. Okay. When you do treat somebody that is a victim of some scene, everybody's got to work together and touch only things that are directly related to your patient care. All right. I will send you that video. I highly recommend it, that you watch it about that stabbing. I'll get it out here in a little bit. But that's it for tonight. Please remember your final will open up Friday at 8 a.m. and go till the following Friday at 5 o'clock. As well as make sure all of your NIMS and everything else that was due today. And then I'll expect to see your those that haven't completed all of the hemisphere stuff by next week. So if anybody needs anything, feel free to shoot me an email or text. If not, that's it. And I'll talk to you guys later.